Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I want to talk about what's going to be the next arc in the Mushoku Tensei anime. It's an unusual arc for reasons I'll get into, and there was some speculation about whether it would be included in the anime adaptation, with most, in fact I'd say almost all, light novel readers hoping that it would be. But we got the first trailer for Mushoku Tensei Season 2, which will be airing next year, back in the summer, and it revealed that we definitely would be seeing this arc adapted. The trailer was amazing and I really can't wait for the new season. There will be hype and I'll be making plenty more content about the series, so please subscribe and ring the bell if you're a fan of Mushoku Tensei, aka Jobless Reincarnation. So, today I'm going to be talking about the history of this arc as part of the story, and then about just why this arc is so popular among people who've read the source material. So, if you're avoiding spoilers, the first part of the video will be spoiler-free, as it's about meta stuff to do with how Mushoku Tensei was written. And then I'll tell you when to close the video before I start talking about why the arc is good and important, which will contain spoilers for Season 2. Now, the thing that makes this arc unusual is that it didn't appear in the original Mushoku Tensei web novel. Mushoku Tensei was originally a web novel, which has been finished for years. It was then rewritten as a light novel series, and then adapted into manga and anime forms. The light novels do follow the same story as the web novel did, unlike with some series which moved to a completely different canon between the web novel and light novel versions, like The Rising of the Shield Hero. But author Rifujin Namaganote did add a fair amount of extra content as he was reworking everything into light novels. This was not to change the story, but to do things like fill in some time skips with some additional story that does even more to flesh out the world and the characters. The first major example of this is the arc I'm talking about today. Originally in the web novel, after the events we saw at the end of Season 1 Part 2 with Eris leaving, there was a 2-year time skip. The story then went straight into the next major arc, which we'll also be seeing in Season 2. However, in the light novels, there is an extra volume, Volume 7, that covers what happens during that 2-year period. This arc also wasn't included in the main manga adaptation, which is one of the main reasons why some people were speculating that it might be cut from the anime. However, this year a new spin-off manga was launched that covers the arc, and that's called the Depressed Wizard or Depressed Sorcerer arc, depending on the translation. So, manga readers will also have this arc as part of their experience of the story. I haven't read any of the Mushoku Tensei manga myself, only the light novels and web novel, so I can't really comment on whether it's a good adaptation, but it's clear that the arc was seen as important enough to be added in with a separate serialization after originally being skipped. But if the story functioned perfectly well in the web novel and manga without this arc, does that mean it's just filler? Well, this is the debate, really. The arc doesn't see any major developments from an overall plot point of view that couldn't have happened off screen, though that's not to say that it doesn't have interesting and exciting plot points of its own. And the new characters introduced are not integral to any future events, which would normally be a property of a filler arc. However, there was absolutely no reason for Rifujin Namaganote to go in and add a volume of filler to his completed story here. Clearly, he felt that the 2-year time skip wasn't as good as telling the story of those 2 years, and using it as a way to really explore Rudeus' mindset after Eris left. We also see some of the formative battles and experiences that took place for him in that time, which shape things like how he uses magic for the rest of the series, and we're also shown more about the world and its people. The main objective that Rudeus has in the following arc is also properly established here, and while it still makes sense without the Volume 7 content, Volume 7 makes it a lot more impactful, showing us how Rudy discovers the problem he's trying to fix in the next arc, and how deeply it's affecting him. So that's really the most I can say about the arc without starting to get into spoilers about what actually happens in it. So if you're anime only and want to wait until Season 2 comes out to find out, thank you for watching, but it's time to say goodbye for this video. If you're still here, let's go into what we can now call the erectile dysfunction arc in a bit more detail. See, the thing is that the ending of Season 1 of the anime did make Rudeus look a lot more motivated than he seemed at that point in the novels. They didn't really change anything. He's still only moving forward at all because he still has Zenith to look for. But I think to give the season more of a sense of closure, they made it feel like this was helping with his depression over Eris leaving, rather than being something he's doing in spite of it. When the trailer for Season 2 came out, when I was making constant references to the depressed wizard arc on Twitter because I got dumped and had a depression arc of my own, though mine was minus the erectile dysfunction at least because I don't have a penis, I did speak to a few anime-onlys. They were saying that they thought from the ending of Season 1 that Rudy had kind of accepted the Eris thing and was now just focused on his mission of finding his mother. This meant that they were surprised to hear that the next arc is still largely about the ongoing emotional impact of Eris leaving. I don't think it'll be difficult to establish that he's still very much on a downer with the opening scenes of Season 2, so I don't really see this as something that will be jarring in the anime, but it is interesting that people perceived it that way. I do think then that if they'd skipped the Volume 7 content and gone straight into Rudy joining Ranoa Magic University, it would have seemed very odd that after 2 years, Rudeus's main concern is still that his junk doesn't work because he's hung up about Eris, considering he already seemed to be on the mend last time we saw him. With the Volume 7 stuff left in, our understanding of Rudeus and his goals is just that much better. This is especially considering that the goal of finding Zenith that was pushing him forward at the end of Season 1 is one that he no longer is currently thinking about when he joins the university. Because, as we already knew from Season 1, Roxy already knows where Zenith is from Kishirika and is on her way to tell Paul, and Elena Lise is going to find Rudeus and tell him it's all being handled. By the time he goes to Ranoa, he's got Elena Lise with him, so has already been told he doesn't need to search for Zenith anymore. Seeing through the events of the Volume 7 arc, Rudeus's hopeless state of mind and his failure to manage emotionally or physically when it comes to being with another woman, there is no question in our minds as to how big of a deal curing his ED is to him, and that isn't something being played for laughs. Oh, everybody thinks Rudeus is at the university to research something important, but really he secretly just wants a cure for old Mr. Floppy. That could be a comical premise if handled differently. But when you've seen his point of view through Volume 7, it's completely possible to take this goal seriously and understand why he's willing to trust in doing what Hitagami says to achieve it, even if it's very unclear to him how researching the mass teleportation event is going to eventually help him get it up. We see his depressed state characterized in so many ways, like his reliance on the strength he gets from worshipping Roxy's panties, which is, again, something that sounds funny, but is written in a way that is actually just really earnest and sad. All of it contributes to making what comes next hit harder and make more sense. But of course, while the main reason this arc was added in was probably to give that extra character development to Rudeus, that doesn't mean that there aren't other aspects to it that make it good. I'm going to talk about 3 of them here, and those are Sara, Soldat, and Elena Lise. Sara is the new Volume 7 character who has the biggest impact. She does make a brief appearance again later in the story, but this is really more to give an opportunity for some closure to her storyline here, and to allow Rudy, and by extension us, to examine how much things have changed for him since the dark days of Volume 7, and how both he and Sara can now both look back at what happened with a more mature perspective. Generally, she isn't an important character in the whole plot of Mushoku Tensei, but she's definitely interesting enough to be more than just a device to show us how Rudy is failing to move on from Eris. Now, I've seen people in the minority that don't like Volume 7 say that Sara is a generic tsundere, but I don't really think that's true. She is a tsundere, but she kind of needs to be, because this casts her as someone who reminds both Rudeus and the audience of Eris in some ways, but just isn't Eris. She's a very talented fighter like Eris, but she uses a bow in contrast to Eris's sword. She's unfriendly to Rudeus at first, but this comes through more from her words and the way she acts towards him socially, rather than Eris's wild, violent treatment of him when they first met. He can see glimpses of what he thinks he's lost in her, but it's all slightly off. She's enough like her to both attract him and remind him of his pain. But she's not her, and she doesn't even know what she's being compared to, making the whole relationship seem simultaneously like something that could have worked under other circumstances, compatibility-wise, but also something that's doomed. She's a likeable character, and I know a lot of people like the idea of a kind of what-if type story where Rudy and Sara actually do make a go of things, which I also think would be quite an interesting idea to explore in terms of just how that would change the future of the setting. And I think writing her off as generic really does a disservice to how carefully written she actually is. Then we have Soldat. He's another interesting character who manages to be, in many ways, exactly what Rudeus needs, despite them hating each other at first. The dynamic between them is not only strangely relatable, guys going from enemies to bros after having a good bar fight, and dishing out a big reasons why you suck speech, but it's also very entertaining. As with Sara, he only makes minor appearances after Volume 7, but his impact on Rudeus during this pretty formative period in his life is one that shouldn't really be understated. I think it's probably intentional that just as Sara can remind us of Eris, Soldat has something of Paul about him, without feeling like an unimaginative clone of an existing personality in Rudeus's life. Finally, I think it's worth talking about Elinalise, because while her involvement in this arc is certainly not the most important or eventful thing she does in the story, this is where Rudeus first actually meets her, and the dynamic between the two of them is established. Rudeus is one of the few men Elinalise thinks is attractive, but really doesn't want to sleep with. This is because of her disdain for Paul. He couldn't perform with her even if he wanted to, because she arrives in his ED arc, so they begin to form this dynamic that Elinalise probably doesn't really get to have with a lot of men, and the wiser, more mature side of her that comes with her old age begins to show at times, something we'll generally see more of in her later relationships with people like Sylphie. This is where she goes from being a kind of comic relief / fan service character to revealing a lot more depth. And we see that, just like everyone else in the series, she's got more to her than the one quirk that we were first introduced to when we first met her. Much bigger developments for her come in the following couple of arcs, but giving her and Rudy some time to get to know each other here, where they're not interacting with other major characters, was, in my opinion, a good choice. So, those are some of my thoughts on what this arc brings to the table to improve and enrich the story. The actual plot of the arc is a good vehicle for all of this, with some interesting challenges for Rudeus and a lot of world building in terms of what life as an adventurer is like in this setting. This is something we don't see too much of outside of here and in the Zenith Rescue, and which is a fairly important aspect of the world building in terms of understanding the adventurers and former adventurers who appear throughout the story. Showing us a period when adventuring was Rudeus's lifestyle is the best way to do this, as we're seeing it all through him, rather than just through stories from characters like Paul, Ghislaine or Roxy. We also begin to see Rudeus really finding his own style when it comes to how he uses magic to fight, and the strategies he becomes fond of in this arc become a big part of his identity that stays with him through many battles to come. I personally really like this arc and can't wait to see it adapted in Season 2. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon and to everyone else who helps me out by watching my videos and subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon. I do know that the last time I said that was quite a long time ago, and I did also put up a video today explaining why I took that long break, which you can watch if you're curious. But I am going to be back to regular uploads as of now, so please subscribe and ring the bell if you want more, and I hope to see you next time.